The House will come to order.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Prayer by the chaplain.
In prayer. Gracious Spirit, we gather today, arriving as individuals, joining in our togetherness to form one great house. Holy One, may our deliberations be filled with the vision of all for whom we gather, young and old, men and women, children and elders, and for the well-being of the land which we inhabit, the water which quenches our thirst, and the air which fills our lungs. Compassionate Spirit, guide those gathered here today that the work of our hands and the words of our mouths be filled with dignity for all, not just those who stand before us, but as well those who are unable to stand, unable to speak, unable to be seen, unable to be heard. Source of strength, may your presence imbue in us the capacity to confront challenges with an open heart and wide outstretched arms, staying measured in our beliefs yet open to new possibilities. Creator of all, may your light be cast upon us as leaders, bringing forth our wisdom, our convictions, and our passions, helping us each to pursue justice while upholding the sacred that is found within us all. Maker of peace, bring upon us, our communities, the state of Minnesota, our entire world, your presence as a message of hope, teaching us and guiding us toward the fruits of living in peace, joy and happiness, well-being and gratefulness, good health and abundance. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol yoshvei tevel. May the one who creates wholeness above bring wholeness, peace, upon us and all creation. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Rabbi Lynn Liberman, Community Chaplain, St. Paul, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will take the roll.
That's one of those things. Leon? Did you do it? No.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 89th session, 8th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Thursday, January 22nd,
If there is no
2015.
objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Comparison reports. There's a copy of this order of business on each member's desk. If there is no objection to the motions, if there is no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail and the substitutions will be made. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading, Senate file number 1.
Second reading. There is a motion at the desk. The clerk will report the motion.
Pursuant to Article 4, Section 19 of the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, Knoblach moved that the rule therein be suspended and an urgency be declared, and that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that Senate file number 1 be given its third reading and be placed upon its final passage.
The Speaker recognizes the member from Sherburne on the motion. Representative Knoblach.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, it's important to suspend the rules to act on Senate File 1. Senate File 1 is the flood bill, the disaster relief bill, the companion to House File 164. We need to process this bill speedily so that counties and other local units of government that are going to be getting aid underneath this bill can let bids, issue contracts, and be able to get to work right away this spring on it, as opposed to waiting and missing that spring opportunity. In addition, members, I would mention that I'm taking the Senate file. There are two small differences between Senate File 1 and House File 164. One on page 1, line 9 is really minor and fairly meaningless, just calling it the Disaster Assistance Contingency Account versus the Disaster Account. The other one on page 2, line 11, the Senate has the word supplement, we have the word supplant, and we want to use the word supplement. Members, I'd hope you'd support this motion so that we can speed this relief on to our local units and of government and other people who are getting this disaster relief.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would encourage all the Democratic members to also vote to suspend the rules. I am a little disappointed that we were not informed in advance that the rules were going to be suspended. That's very typical protocol when you want the minority to join you in suspending the rules. So in the future, I hope that we can actually get some notice that this motion is going to be made prior to session. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. I recognize the author, Representative Knoblach, who will explain the bill.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, in June 2014, this last year, large areas of our state experienced significant flooding due to torrential rains that had occurred at that time and the snowpack that had been in Minnesota earlier. And I think the magnitude of this flood can perhaps best be described by quoting from a source I don't usually quote from, and that is the New York Times. Quoting from the New York Times, June 24th, 2014, Minnesota was besieged on Tuesday, June 18th, by some of its most widespread flooding in years. The flooding spanned vast regions of the state, from the Canadian border to Iowa. Quote, "This is severe flooding, and in many different locations in the state, which I haven't seen before," closed quote, Governor Mark Dayton said. He also said, quote, "I've seen severe weather, tornadoes, flash floods, and ice storms, but usually they impact one of the area of the state. This is the whole state, close quote. In St. Paul, the Mississippi River rose to a nearly 20-foot crest, forcing the closing of some roads. Officials expected the Mississippi River to crest in St. Paul on Thursday at 20.5 feet, the 6th highest on record. Quote, "It's been quite a historical flood for this area," close quote, said Craig Schmidt, a service hydrologist for the National Weather Service. Quote, "We've got large areas of the state that are underwater. We've had some of our gauges hit record highs," quote, closed quote. I'd also quote from a flood information service, floodlist.com, that said, at its peak, the flooding was so widespread that 35 of Minnesota's 87 counties had declared a state of emergency. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture's weekly crop report said that 53% of the farmland in Minnesota had been flooded. Members, I'm going to have pages hand out. I guess they've already handed out the information. 2 pieces of information. One, a map that shows the areas that are affected and have relief coming from House File 164, Senate File 1. You can see it's large areas of the southern, central, and northern part of the state. And secondly, members, there is a spreadsheet that outlines the different amounts of money that I'll just go through very briefly. In total, there is about a little more than $74 million of flood relief coming to the state of Minnesota through this bill through either federal or state sources, or in a small amount local sources. This bill is primarily the match for federal funding. There's $13,181,000 in FEMA match, which is money for structures, primarily buildings around the state that were damaged. We've got $1.4 million of Chapter 12B funding, which some of you know is a program we implemented in Minnesota a couple years ago that provides funding to areas that aren't quite seriously damaged enough to get the federal match, but are still felt to be seriously damaged. We've got $3 million for MnDOT, which will match an 80% match, $12 million of federal money, and we have about $2.5 million to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, which will get us roughly another $2 million. The total cost of this bill, members, on the bottom line is only $2,246,000 because of the contingency account funding that was available last year, and about $15 million in past flood cancellation dollars that are not needed. Members, this is important relief that we need to get out to our local units of government and others. I would urge your support for the bill and stand for questions.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading.
3rd reading, Senate File Number 1.
3rd reading. Discussion on the bill. The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Knoblach yield to a couple questions?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Knoblach, I have a couple questions. One relating in my district, the city of Mendota. I'm checking to see if Mendota would be eligible under Section 1 for reimbursement for mudslides that occurred in the June flood.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knoblach.
Representative Hansen, excuse me, can you tell me what county that is in? Is that Ramsey?
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Knoblach, that would be in Dakota County.
Representative Knoblach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have money for Dakota County in the bill as part of the 12B appropriation. There is an estimated $1 million of damage for Dakota County, of which the state share is about $750,000. You know, there are several hundred different items in this particular bill that are being funded. I guess I don't know that I can speak to a particular mudslide in your district, but we do have money for Dakota County in the bill.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Knoblach, the mudslide was part of that the incident where the federal government came out to look at it, Dakota County Emergency Management, so I believe it had gone through the process. The problem was that that particular portion was not federally approved, and so the contingency account under the 12B is where it would fit in. However, also in Dakota County, I believe the Bowser appropriation, I have a question on Section 4 with the erosion control. If I know that several of the counties and the soil and water districts had put forward their needs based on grass waterways that were destroyed, those type of things. And my question is if Section 4 would also apply to Dakota County, and if it is the amount that was requested from up through the districts towards the Board of Water and Soil Resources.
He will yield. Representative Knoblach.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hansen, I can have staff come and pass out a handout here. There actually is not funding for Dakota County in the Bowser portion of the bill, and that is something that Governor Dayton's administration worked on. There are very strict requirements for the federal matches, particularly in the conservation area with Bowser. Some of it's at 40%, some of it's at 45%. I think there's other percentages depending on the situation. However, when they went through the process, I do not believe they qualified for federal funding matches for those particular emergencies or that particular damage. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for your indulgence on this. One final question. So the cancellation...
He will yield.
Would Representative Knoblach yield?
He will yield.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Knoblach, so the cancellations that occur in 2011 and the other previous, were there any Bowser appropriations that were canceled that had not been used, say, in the Duluth flood or other appropriations?
Representative Knoblach.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hansen, I don't know if I've got an answer for you on that right now. However, I can check with staff and see if I can get an answer. I think it was pretty well acknowledged by everyone that those other cancellations were for funds that were not needed for those communities any longer. But whether they had any Bowser money in it, I guess I don't know at this time.
Further discussion on the bill. The member from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Mr. Speaker and members, I rise to support the bill because of its uniqueness. This is the first time in the history of the state that we have addressed a disaster under Chapters 12A and 12B. 12A was created under the Pellini administration in a bipartisan way, working with 13 agencies in 87 counties and all cities and all other municipalities in this state to ensure that we would never have the confusion that resulted during and after the southeastern Minnesota floods. Chapter 12B, which has already been referenced today on the House floor, was created last session at the request and direction of the legislative auditor to ensure that now this is also the first disaster where we are operating under dual declarations, a presidential declaration and a gubernatorial declaration, so that every possible source of a disaster that needs to be addressed can be addressed in this bill. Today should be a good day. It's a day when we did not have to go into special session. It's a day when we had the first reports of the disasters, the 13 agencies that are involved, the 87 counties, the cities, the townships, and the school districts could begin to address the needs of the people of Minnesota. Today should also be a good day when we can operate in one of the few things that we do best as states people. Today should be a day when there would be unanimity among us, that we are addressing the needs of the people of Minnesota without a special session, knowing that the number that Representative Knoblach has in his bill is as close to a final number that we have ever had for a disaster in the history of this state. So I encourage not only anyone and everyone to vote yes, I also encourage you to remember that there are times when we do not need to, one, have a special session, and two, when we can work together for the best of the state as state's people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to encourage support for this bill. As we saw on the map, it affects greatly much of southern Minnesota. All of the counties that I represent will get relief from this bill. I recently spoke to the Freeborn County highway engineer, and she just gave me a couple of examples of some highways where the large culverts were washed out due to being overwhelmed by the flooding. So it's much needed, and I would encourage support. Thank you.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Pawlowski. It is indeed a good day and a day to celebrate in that we can all vote yes for this good bill. We have a contingency fund. Unspent money is going to be put into that contingency fund. Representative Knoblach, you used the term unneeded funds. There are still local communities and the Lake Superior Zoo that still need some of those funds. And we are still attempting to make a case for those things. They were unspent funds, and they're going to go into the contingency fund. But indeed, they are needed funds. And we in northeastern Minnesota, in St. Louis County and Carleton County, are going to try to continue to make the case for those unspent funds as we go forth. As Representative Pawlowski said, usually when we go into a situation, we're working on estimated numbers. And that's what happened. Estimated numbers. And we passed the estimates. It's a good bill. I'm going to vote yes. But I'm going to hope that there's a way that some of the units can still get some of the unspent funds.
The member from Scott, Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a bill that holds a lot of import for the folks in Scott County. I first want to acknowledge the work that Representative Pawlowski did last session on behalf of every county in the state to put together a contingency fund that the governor could draw from. While this takes care of some very immediate needs for a number of the counties, I think it also was brought to bear and brought to light the number of private-public considerations where there's additional work that needs to be done, and I would just like to let the members know that those issues will be addressed in the upcoming session. So disaster relief is something that's on the minds of all of us, and there will be more forthcoming legislation on that as well. So thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members, I would encourage a yes vote. This is a badly needed piece of legislation, although I do want to point out that some of us felt that there were some other deficiencies that we would have liked to have had addressed. And this would be a comment to Representative Knoblach. I hope as the session moves forward there will be consideration for those other deficiencies that some members on our side of the aisle did bring up during the Ways and Means Committee. And I was left with the impression from some of the chairs there that they would be taking a good look at those deficiencies. But as a co-sponsor of this particular bill, I want to thank you for moving it forward. It's needed and it should move forward rapidly. Thank you.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Having lived through the 2000 floods of southeastern Minnesota, having as tax chair with the 2012 floods in the Duluth area, northeast area, driving up there and seeing the damage, working with the mayor of Duluth, it's refreshing to see on a day like today, on a bill like this, that every member of this legislature can get together. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't personally thank Representative Pawlowski from Winona for his efforts on this. If you added up the hours that Representative Pawlowski spent on this, and to pass the bill, or several bills over the last couple of years to keep us out of special session, I think we need as a body to look closer at his work, and I think our numbers are too small on what we have funded that with. So I'll certainly be supporting taking a look at how can we take the work of Representative Pawlowski and increase that contingency fund, because what we found out on this time was probably wasn't quite enough in there. But the concept worked, and it should be 134-0 today. Members, please vote green.
Further discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, encourage a yes vote and hope we have a unanimous vote. This is what we do for the people of Minnesota when they have needs. And we're doing the right thing today by passing this bill. But as I've thought about this bill, and this is the first spending bill that we're sending off the House floor, it did strike me to kind of look at some of the other spending that's being embraced and proposed by the Republican caucus during this session. A lot of talk about nursing homes. People are rapidly embracing $185 million to be spent on nursing homes in the state in the next biennium. Less than we spent 2 years ago, but nonetheless $185 million. $250 million Representative Franzen is putting in a bill for child care. $200 million on transportation. $200 million embracing the coalition of greater Minnesota cities. Republican members tripping over themselves to spend and spend and spend money. I'm sure the Speaker is going to put at least some money into Representative Loon's account to spend on education this year. And when I start to total that up, I feel a little bit bad for Representative Davids. He's going to have no money left over for any tax cuts. It's going to be tough in that situation for him to pass those $400 million that have already been proposed for corporate tax cuts. So as I've been thinking about it, I must think Representative Knoblach must feel like Rip Van Winkle here, waking up 8 years later and looking at the Republican Party that he left in 2006 and saying, what is happening? How can we possibly be spending all of this money on Minnesotans' needs? And Representative Drazkowski must be losing sleep at night thinking, I am going to be passing the biggest state budget in state history. And it's not because the Senate or Governor Dayton forced you to. The budget you're going to pass off this floor is going to be the biggest state budget in state history. And so this is a good day. We're doing the right thing because we're investing and we're helping Minnesotans. We're using taxpayer dollars to help Minnesotans. And I look forward to having the discussions as we go forward, to seeing how the folks that were out on the campaign trail this last session and saying, we raise taxes too much, we have a bloated budget, and at the same time are saying, and we need to spend another $1 billion, are going to reconcile those two things. I think that's the most interesting question facing the House of Representatives this session, and I look forward to having that discussion. I encourage a yes vote, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Knoblach. I appreciate the work that you've done on this, the hours you've put in it, and that you've been able to put this together in a bipartisan fashion and to put it to us so quickly when these counties need disaster. To Representative Thiessen, I'd say, thank you. I'm glad to hear that you have a true concern about our spending problem in the state, and I look forward to working with you on a budget and your commitment to have a responsible budget. So I'm glad to hear your comments. As we all know, this legislation is in response to the flooding that occurred last summer. And, you know, all of us were sent by our constituents to be fiscal stewards of their taxpayer dollars. And one of the things I'm so pleased about in this bill is that we didn't just bring in new money to it. We actually researched a way to spend unspent money, unspent taxpayer dollars. So that's what this bill does. This bill cancels and reallocates unspent money from past natural disasters in 2011 and 2012 and allocates an additional $2.2 million. Members, there are 47 counties that were affected by the floods, and they go all the way up from Roselle County and Lake of the Woods County, in the south all the way down to Freeborn and Mower counties, in the west to Pipestone County, and in the east all the way to Chisago counties. This legislation will help those counties as well as communities in the 7-district area. I'm pleased that with 70% of the state being affected by floods, that we have moved quickly and in a bipartisan fashion to solve this problem for the state of Minnesota. Members, I encourage a green vote today. Thank you.
The member from Sherburne, the bill author, Representative Knoblach.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, to focus back on the flood bill, to Representative Hansen, I have the answer to your question on Bowser. There's about $3 million of Bowser money from the Duluth floods that would be canceled by this bill. And again, regarding Dakota County and the mudslides, you know, the federal government's got some real strict standards for what they will cover in a match and what they won't cover in a match, and that's why we've got this new program underneath 12B. And the Dakota County didn't meet the federal standards, and that's why we're appropriating money for Dakota County under 12B. I believe it was $1.1 million, no, $750,000 of state money that would be going to Dakota County in this case. For Representative Murphy and Representative Albright and others, I know that there are other people who have suffered flood damage. You know, when I say that the money was unneeded, I probably needed to expand and say unneeded for the federal match. This is really a bill that accesses the federal matching money. We're not looking at a special appropriation otherwise, with the exception of these few counties that qualified for 12B, and I certainly would encourage Representative Murphy and Representative Albright and others who think they have needs to bring them forward in the regular process. Representative Carlson, in regard to deficiencies, I've actually got a hearing on House File 264, the deficiency bill in Health and Human Services Finance, tomorrow, and there are important issues to be addressed there, and we are moving that bill then through the normal committee process. And finally, I do want to thank Representative Pawlowski, as others have, for his work on the contingency account and the contingency fund. From what I can see, that makes a lot of sense. I think the reason that we have had some cancellation of funds is that when there is a special session and there is a disaster situation and you're quickly called into special session, you don't always know right away at that time just what the total of damages are, and so you naturally err on the side of making sure there is enough money. I think that Representative Pawlowski's idea of the contingency accounts, and anyone else who has worked on him with that, had a good idea in it being something that will prevent special sessions in the future and help us to better spend the taxpayers' money. With that, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I thank you in advance for your support on this. Let's pass this bill so we can get this money out to our counties and the Indian reservations and others who need it. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 132 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of the first reading of House Files 328 through 391.
First reading, House Files 328 through 391. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Representative Clark, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you. Members, I'd like to introduce you to a delegation that is visiting us from Kenya today. They are here at our front seat up here, and I'd like to ask them to stand. And let me just tell you, they are from the Wajir County government in Kenya. In Kenya, county governments are like state governments. So we have with us the equivalent of the Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Abdi Hafid Yaro. I want to welcome him and the whole delegation. And they are brought to us, led by Judge Lejun Lang, our own Judge Lejun Lang, who is the president of the International Leadership Organization, bringing them here. And they have been visiting parts of Minnesota. I think they were recently in Edina to look at some renewable energy issues and recycling. And their point is to see how we do government here and to take some of that back to Kenya, and hopefully it's an exchange that goes mutually back and forth between the two communities. So I'd like to ask members to welcome the Kenya delegation and go back and say hello to them when we're done here. Thank you.
Members, we have a former member in the chamber. Please join me in welcoming former member Gary Schaefer from Gibbon, Minnesota, who served from 1981 to 1992. The member from announcements. The member from Beltrami, Representative Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a little lighter note, I'd like to give a heartfelt congratulations to Coach Tom Saratori and the Bemidji State University Beavers for winning the North Star Cup, defeating Minnesota Duluth 4-0 on Friday, and Minnesota State at Mankato 3-1 in the finals.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Actually, I have two things, Mr. Speaker. One is I just wanted to point out Friday night's score where #1 Minnesota State beat the Gophers 4-2. Saturday, we're not going to talk about. Mr. Speaker, would Chairman Hackbarth yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Considine.
Thank you. Ready? First of all, thank you for responding to my email, and I'm very pleased to hear that there's going to be public hearing. I was just kind of curious, since it's tomorrow, how it's going to work.
Representative Hackbarth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a full agenda, and we will have time at the end for any public testimony, just like any other hearing. And we actually even called Land Stewardship and offered them time to testify, and they turned us down.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Chairman Hackbarth, I'm sorry, I'm new to this. Approximately how long are we talking about?
He will yield. Representative Hackbarth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Considine. Hopefully it's going to be about 15 minutes, but we have a full agenda. It depends on how many questions there are. Just like any other hearing, we don't know how long it's going to last, but they will be at the end of the agenda. Hopefully they'll have about 15 minutes. Might be 10 minutes, might be 5 minutes, but we're going to try to hold time at the end for public testimony.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate the quick response and responding right away.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish. Announcements.
Mr. Speaker and members, I'd like to take this time to announce some members or some friends in the balcony from what's known as GOCRA, the defenders of our Second Amendment, the Gun Owners Civil Rights Alliance. Thank you for being here.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson. Announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This announcement is for members of the Ethics Committee. We will organize tomorrow at 12 noon in room 400 South. This is for the members of the Committee on Ethics. Thank you.
Announcements. The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry. Just, Mr. Speaker, we have new members in the body. If you could just kind of remind people how they should address the body through the Speaker, that would be, I think, helpful to all of us, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Drazkowski. I think you just said it well. Make sure that all conversations go through the Speaker. Any questions, we can talk offline. Further announcements. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, January 29th, 2015.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, January 29th, 2015. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Thursday, January 29th, 2015.